this is going to be the base of the hat. It's made out of Wenge wood, and once it's been cut out I'm going to put it back on the lathe to hollow it out slightly and make it into an oval shape. So this is the underside of the rim for the hat, which I'm just going to be thinning out to give it a bit of a curvature, so it's not just like a flat disc. So I've moved on to the top side of the rim, which I'll be thinning out from the centre, bringing it out to the outside edge just to thin the whole thing down. I'm now going to shape the outside of this rim into an oval shape so it looks more like the shape of a top hat really, as opposed to being perfectly round. This is the top section, and it's made out of a small block of Wenge wood and Purpleheart, which is going to be the band, and it's going to be glued onto the rim here. I've taken the corners off of the top hat section, and I'm going to round that off on the sanding wheel and then give it a bit more of a profile. Probably going to need to use a Dremel on the long sides, but it's going to be made to look much more like a top hat. I've mounted it back on the lathe so I can turn the sides of the hat to give it a bit more shape. Okay, as you can see we've jumped a few stages here because I forgot to press the record button, but it's all finished with the shaping. I've glued the top hat to the rim section and I'm about to clean up the excess glue. So that's the hat finished with the sanding and shaping. I'm going to mount it back on the lathe so I can carry on with the underside so I can get it to fit on the snowman's head. So this is the section that I'm going to be hollowing out. It's just enough to bowl it slightly so when it's sitting on the snowman's head it's not going to look out of place. It's going to fit the profile of the snowman's head. So the hat's finished. I've decided that I'm going to leave it natural because I was going to stain it with a black spirit-based stain, but I've decided I prefer it like it is. So I'm just going to apply some cellulose sanding sealer, a couple of coats probably, and then I'll give it a couple of coats of wax afterwards. This next part's going to be the snowman's nose. It's made from Paduke wood, which I chose because it's carrot coloured already, so it saves me staining or colouring it in any way. I'm just going to leave it natural. So I'm going to sand the nose into shape because it's the easiest way of doing it, being as it is such a small piece of wood. These offcuts of Purpleheart I'm going to be using for the eyes and the buttons on the snowman. I'm going to be sanding them into a rough shape. I'm not going to try and get these too perfect because I do actually want them to resemble lumps of coal. So that's all 5 buttons done. I'm going to be using this 3/8 Forstner bit now to drill the front of the snowman to accept these buttons. I'll be gluing them in, the same for the eyes as well. So that's all the buttons and the eyes and the nose glued in. I've carved the mouth out and I'll be using some copper inlay for that. This is the copper powder I'm going to be using. You just mix this in with some 2-part epoxy resin and I'll be just laying it into the mouth on the snowman. That's the epoxy all mixed up with the copper powder. I'm just going to lay it into the snowman's mouth with a cocktail stick, and once it's gone off, come back in and we'll be sanding that down. If you use some really fine wire wool on this metal inlays, whether it's copper or bronze or whatever, it brings out a much better finish than sandpaper does. But you still do need to use a sandpaper to break through the surface of the resin. The wire wool just polishes the metal particles. So that's the snowman's mouth all finished. I'm now going to apply a couple of coats of sanding sealer and continue on with the waxing. This is a piece of pine. It's going to be used for the base for the snowman to sit on, and also the Victorian street lamp. The circle that I'm cutting out now is where the snowman's going to be sitting. I'm going to be using this piece of Ovangkol wood to make the street lantern, the post and the lantern that sits on top. I have to cut it in half because I've got to run a cable through the middle of this, which is going to be used for the LED candle that's going to be sitting in the top of the lantern. I'm using a 4mm router cutter to cut out the groove for the cable. They will then be glued back together again, and once that's all dried, it will be put on the lathe for shaping. The next part of the process is to glue the two halves together, which I'm doing now. They'll be clamped up and I'll get back to it when they're dried. Okay, the glue's dried, so I'm now going to round this off with a roughing gouge before carrying on with a spindle gouge to give it the final shape. Time to shine the wood. I'm going to be applying some of this wax that I made. It's just beeswax and walnut oil with a few drops of citrus oil. It doesn't give the wood a high gloss, it's more like a sheen, but I like it. So these are the 6 parts I'm going to be using to make the lantern with. There's the top, the bottom and the 4 corners. They're going to be glued together, and I'm going to be using some cut up cola bottle plastic for the glass. I will be adding an outer frame later on after the glass has been glued on the outside of the surfaces here. So this is the LED light I'll be using in the lantern. I've got to dismantle this one here, and I will be using the bulb which will be mounted on the top section of this pit here, and the rest of it, i.e. the base part of this, or this section here, is going to be taken to bits and then rebounded in the base of the snowman. So this is the lamp post all but finished. I've put it back on the lathe because I've decided to reshape the actual lamp post section because it was a little bit bulky, so I've thinned it down a little bit more. Unfortunately, in doing that, it did tend to get a bit close to the join line underneath, and it's split in a couple of sections which I've now repaired. Obviously I've had to mount it back on because I've assembled the lantern as well. I've just got one last piece of glass to fit on here, and that, also I've got to make a finial that will be going on top, and then that will be the lantern finished. I've also got to make a frame to go around this outside of the glass area just to tidy it up. This is a piece of Ovangkol wood, which is what I will be using to turn into the finial that's going to be sitting on top of the lantern. So this is the finial finished. It looks a bit like a pawn out of a chess piece to me, but hey, it's going to have to do for me. I'm going to sand it down, wax it, and then it's going to be glued to the top of the lantern. The base of this ornament is now going to be covered in artificial snow. First of all, you apply this PVA glue all over the surface, spread it out and just sprinkle the snow dust on. This is the snow that I'll be using. It comes all the way from America actually. Just sprinkle it over gently into the glue. You don't need to brush it in, you just let it soak in and it will dry with the PVA. The snowman's going to be sitting on his little hill like this, and I'll be placing the lamppost somewhere around about there. I've just got to take this hill over to the drill, and there'll be a hole drilled in the top there, and the cable or the wire's going to be fed through to the bottom where the switch will be located.